Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Blame It on Marketing. Today we have a juicy topic of ego, and especially ego with people that are not necessarily in marketing but you have to work with, like senior execs, CEOs, your clients. So hopefully this episode is both for in-house and if you're a consultant, which I think we're going to be a little bit more on that angle, but I think it's still appropriate. We have the wonderful Rissy with us today, but I will let her introduce herself.
Hello, nice to be here with both of you. I'm really excited. My name is Rissy La Touche, and I am a marketing strategist based in Amsterdam. And I also own a consultancy named Dimple Studio, where I work with B2B SaaS companies most of the time on marketing strategy, go-to-market, product marketing, and content and social media. That's me. I'm from New York. I've been here in Amsterdam for about 5 years, and I've been doing marketing for 15. So I've seen a lot of different things over those years.
Well, we're in good company today. All the traumatized consultants together. So before we get into this topic of the ego, what is your deepest, darkest marketing confession? So something that you've got wrong.
Yeah. So I feel like this isn't that deep and dark, but this is a little bit of an opportunity to hate on Facebook Ads Manager, or Facebook, I'll say the Meta platform,
We're here.
which I think every marketer loves an opportunity for that. But back when Facebook, or Instagram, I should say, introduced the account switcher, so you could be logged into like your personal account and then within the same app, log into your business account at the same time. There was a bug in the platform. And so I hopped on to go post a picture of my best friend and I like wrote this whole tribute to our friendship and everything. And I posted it. And my boss texted me like 2 minutes later. She was like, "Did you just post something to Caviar's Instagram handle?" And I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So we had probably like 50,000 followers at the time. And I had to go like pull that post down. And it wasn't my fault. It was just that they had, of course, like they often do, introduced a new feature and didn't test it properly.
At least it was like a lovely tribute to
A
your
nice
best
post,
friend.
yeah.
And not like,
That's true.
like I notoriously post like sarcastic memes. So like at least it wasn't something like that, like
Or something
borderline
political,
bitchy about your boss. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a professor in college who was really bullish on us not, especially as marketing professionals, not posting anything like questionable to social. And so my social channels have always been public for this reason, because I'm like, if I wouldn't post it publicly, then I probably shouldn't put it up. So luckily that protects me a little bit in terms of what might accidentally get posted to the corporate social channel. Hopefully that never happens again.
You're smart and I'm waiting to get cancelled.
I love the courage though. It's great. The confidence.
I think we also have like a, if I'm not going to say it out loud in public, I wouldn't post it kind of mentality,
totally.
right? So like it's nothing that we wouldn't own up to. But I guess that's still cancelable depending on the interpretation. Anyway.
Who interprets it?
It's fine. So, Rissy, picture this. You are just starting to entertain a new client, like you're still in the kind of negotiation contracting bit, figuring out what exactly you're going to be doing. What are some of the ways that you identify a potential CEO, let's say for this example, that is going to let their ego get in the way of their business?
Yeah. I actually had a call like this where I did a discovery call with the CEO of a company. And I had looked into their background before, and there was a ton of marketing experience in this person's background. So I assumed that they would have a great perspective on marketing, and that they just needed somebody potentially to help them out, because at the time the company was going through founder-led marketing. And so I was super excited to talk to this person. And on the call, what I realized is that they weren't asking me any questions about my expertise. They were very much like, here's what we're seeing, here are the issues that we're having, and here's exactly how I think it needs to be solved. And throughout that entire call, I realized that this person genuinely had no clue what they were talking about. And I wanted to say something. I had so many thoughts about it, but they never asked for my expertise. They never paused to say, what do you think about this? Do you think we're on the right track? And the call essentially ended without me ever refuting anything they said. And I went back and forth for a really long time. Do I want to follow up? Do I want to, send an email, giving my expertise, like trying to push this forward, seeing if there's an opportunity to work with them. But the more I thought about that conversation, the more I was like, if I can spend a half hour on a call with someone and at not one moment do they ask, they took the call, they know what I do, but not for a single moment do they ask, what I believe in or whether or not they're on the right track, that's probably a sign that they're not going to be a good client for me. And fundamentally, to the core of your question, what that comes down to is asking questions or observing whether or not somebody truly has a good understanding of marketing. Because when you're starting out with a potential client or even like a lead or boss who doesn't have a good understanding of marketing and doesn't acknowledge that they might be wrong about things, you're going to have a uphill battle, I believe, throughout that entire engagement. And so I'm always looking for people who are curious, who ask questions, who, show humility.
I think that's a really interesting point. Go, Emma.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree, and I think we've probably as consultants all sat on the receiving end of some of those conversations before.
Yeah.
And also, if you're going for an in-house role, for example, that's another. If someone is not asking you questions or like they're saying this is the way we're going to do stuff and they're not interested in your outlook on that, I think that is a big red flag. I think some of the other things that I've witnessed on that first kind of introductory call with a new client have been things like an aversion to either someone doing an audit or wanting to write a strategy. Those are two big red flags for me, not just as a consultant, just as a marketer in general, because I sort of think if you're not prepared to let someone take the time to get under the skin of something and also, like they're like, oh, I don't want you to waste time with a strategy. If that's their initial attitude, that's not good for me.
For sure.
I think another thing for me that I've now in retrospect realized how bad it was if you're having the first couple of calls, like maybe before you've even started, and they're bitching about people on their team, like openly being like, yeah, they're not very good or that's shit or blah blah. Like, because if that is the case, then why are they still there? Why have you not taken action to fire them? And then also, I'm a brand new person, so like it's far too comfortable, at least for me, for you to be really going in and saying that and like kind of poisoning the well, right? Because hopefully if they are that shit, I will come to that conclusion and have a conversation with you about it. So that's another one for me that's like, ick, doesn't feel well.
I also will say that one thing I like to do when I notice somebody is kind of, like really pushing forward and not taking that pause, I'll ask them like questions out of curiosity. So if they make a statement that I don't agree with, I'll say, oh, what makes you believe that? Or where did you learn that? And sometimes that's a really good way to get people to think, and maybe they might start asking questions beyond that. But if they double down or they don't show any curiosity about why you might be asking that, I'm like, okay, this probably isn't the type of person who's going to be curious in the way that makes us work.
Do you think the lack of curiosity is like, how do I want to say this? Do you think curiosity and ego don't go together?
I don't think they go together super well, no.
Do you
Because
think
usually when
that,
you're,
do you think that you can act like you're curious, but only do it
not
as like only do it as like a service?
Yeah, but I still think that's better. At least,
Okay.
at least it's a thought in your head, And maybe somebody says something interesting enough that kind of like pushes you in the other direction. But if you're not open to it at all, like I will say I do this with, I like to say that I'm a control freak who likes to pretend that I'm not one. So especially in like content and social media, it can be so hard to keep those things on the rails, right? And so I will have an idea in my head of how I want things to go, and I'll be trying to stick to it as best as I can. But I don't tell people like, we're not going to budge from this. I'll always ask questions. I'll always be curious. And sometimes I do get something that changes my mind. So even though I'm acting, I'm still open just because that's still,
I guess it's,
something that
and it's being aware of your own like tendencies and maybe limitations as well. Which again is like, like anti-ego in a way, right? Because you're probably not aware of your limitations.
Something else that stands out in my mind when I've been on these sort of like either initial or first few calls with like a founder in particular is when they have got their hands in everything and they start saying, oh, I've been doing the marketing and I do the sales calls and I'm basically like in charge of the product and then you're like, okay, so you're not CEOing or foundering, you're, and it's not because, exactly. you are micromanaging everything. You've like your control, you're trying to control your team, especially when like, obviously if it's a small organization, you kind of sometimes understand that might be the case. But yeah, definitely the ones that are like in everything is like a big red flag for me, because I'm like, why? We all know that high performing businesses have have founder CEOs who like hire smart people to let them get on with shit. So
Yes,
when they're
exactly.
not, it's weird.
Yeah, and it's really tough when you're a consultant and you land in that spot too, where
Mm-hmm.
because essentially like, a founder is hiring you, but you're also hiring them in a way. And so when you're hired within a certain realm of expertise, it really blows my mind when people will pay me money to not actually let me do what it is I think needs to happen based on my expertise. And especially a lot of the companies that I work with are more early stage. And so it's such a resource constrained environment that I think that people think earlier stage companies have more room to experiment. I actually think later stage companies have more room to experiment
Agreed.
because they have a much wider range of resources. Something can go phenomenally well on one side and then not at all on the other, right? Whereas when you're tiny and you have a small amount of money, a small amount of team time, you really need to be or intentional about how you're using that time. And I find that founders often will push back on certain things. And I'm like, well, this whole thing might fail if we do that. But if you really believe that's what you want to do, okay.
Yeah, I think, isn't that how we got to this topic when we did our pre-call, when we were trying to decide what to talk about? It's like, you'd be surprised how many times people hire me to tell them what to do and then do the opposite anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, a quick note I will say a lot of founders do not need to start a podcast. I just need to put that out there because the amount of times I have been pushed in that direction, it takes a lot of work, as I'm sure we all know. So I will say most founders do not.
Couldn't
No,
agree
they
more.
do not.
Couldn't agree more.
When we're thinking about that kind of scenario that we've like just discussed, where there is maybe a CEO or someone in the C-suite that, you know, you think their ego's kind of like hindering everything. Obviously, we talked a lot about like making sure you ask relevant questions and you staying curious. But is there anything else you've done that kind of helps you like move past that or like avoid those people?
Yeah. So one thing that I do that really only works for companies that are not solo founders. So I'm actually personally trying to move away from working with solo founders, mostly because it is actually a lot of work compared to working with a slightly larger business where there's a full team to work with. It's also much easier to gather information when there's a team present and to move faster. And so I'm aiming to work with those types of businesses more. And one thing that I find during the discovery process that's really helpful is to talk to the team members about their experiences, because then you get more context on how much freedom they have, whether or not their expertise is actually valued, what their perspective is on the founder and the direction the company is going in. Because for every founder, I have my own business. My business is my baby. And so that's true of every founder. They all really, really want this thing to succeed, but that can sometimes blind them in some ways. And so getting the perspective of the team is always going to be really helpful. I also always love kind of just doing basic research, see what's out there and being said about the company, see how people are talking about it, see what features they've had, because that can also give you a fairly good guide into what is most important to them.
Yep. We kind of obviously we jumped into this episode with saying the ego, not saying, assuming that having an ego is a bad thing, which
Yeah.
I'm sure some people would disagree too. But what are some of the downsides if you do have an ego as a business owner to running your business? Because again, some people will think it's great because you're like super sure and motivated and you can push past stuff and you don't let people get to you. But like, what's the other
Yeah.
side of that?
The downside. It's such a double-edged sword because you do need ego for your confidence. You need it even to have the courage to go forth and start a business, right? You do really need that base. However, at the same time, like hiring people and then not allowing them to do what they're good at can be a huge pitfall. Not, as I mentioned before, not being curious is a big one as well. I feel like it leads to a lot of missed opportunities and not necessarily being willing to change direction when it's necessary. So if you have this idea in your head and you're like, this is exactly how this needs to work, and that's the only thing that you're stuck to. It really takes a more humble ego in order to be able to admit that you might need to change direction. And a lot of the larger, or let's say more successful companies that you look at, if you look at their founding stories and say the first like 1 to 3 years they were in existence, you'll find that a lot of them have pivoted actually. So I spent 4 years working at Square, for example. And when Square started out, they were a credit card reader that you could plug into your phone. And they were at farmers markets helping small businesses. And then they turned into this huge unicorn of a company. But Square pivoted quite a bit. They had their fundamental goal of we're going to help financial businesses be economically successful. However, they had to expand into small business loans. They expanded into like a actual like point of sale system that you could put on a counter. And what was really interesting being at Square when they IPO'd, the price that they went on the stock market at was fairly on the low side. And the reason is that Wall Street didn't know where to place them because they had such a diverse business across so many different products. And fundamentally, that's what led the company to success, right? But they wouldn't have been able to do that if there wasn't this like deep curiosity about, how to go about things. We actually had an internal saying, one of our 4 corners, which was like our operating principles, was break the rules, I think it was, and constantly experimenting in that way allowed the company to be really successful. At the same time, if you have a larger ego where you're like, I'm just going to experiment on anything because everything that I do is correct, that can also, kind of cause your business to not go in the right direction. So knowing who to trust, and I think trusting people is also part of having a well-balanced ego. Learning how to like communicate with people, how to ask questions, and all of those things kind of creates this ecosystem around you where it's protective to your business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important to remember because I think we talked about this in another episode where we were talking about, do you remember we were talking about the swoop and poopers, Ruta?
Yeah.
The people who swoop in, go do this thing and then disappear off.
Swoop and poop.
And that they don't, and that they sometimes, those are the type of people that like, even when presented with the facts, even when presented with data, they very often aren't interested. They don't want to listen to that. And I think that is something that's kind of like one of the negative sides of someone with an ego, like that I am always right mentality, that no lack of introspection, all of those sorts of things. Obviously, if you are a bit like that, it's going to be very difficult for you to recognize that as well. That's like one of the really hard parts about this whole conversation, which is so often when we are working with those people, they don't know, or some of them don't know, maybe until things start to go really wrong in their business and then they're kind of looking around pointing fingers. But I think it's like if you are, I think ego is good, and we'll get to that in this episode, but I think if you are experiencing the negative sides of ego, but you feel like you need to have one as a founder, because you do, I think it is almost balancing that sense of data that is presented to you. And even if your instant reaction is, well, this can't be right, or like Ruta said, and get the facts. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's your job as a founder or a CEO, even if you've got people around you that you don't necessarily trust. Your job is to understand the facts before you make decisions. So I feel like for me, that's a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think that we've talked a lot about what happens when someone has an ego, but there's also a part that comes with questioning your ego or challenging your ego, like very tactical things that you can do in order to do that. One that I like is say sorry when you're wrong. A lot of people will not apologize when they're wrong about something. And that's a very approachable way to go about, starting to challenge your ego and ensuring that it is balanced. Another one, as I've said multiple times, is asking questions, but you're asking questions of the people and the team around you. That's a good way to figure out if you do trust people or not, remaining open-minded to their answers. Even if you don't change fundamentally from the response, just listening is a great way to not only kind of make sure that your ego is balanced, but also to show people that you trust them. And I feel like when you have demonstrated to the people that you that you work with, that you trust them, they can also be helpful in terms of like making sure that you're balanced. They'll also turn back around and start giving you information because they're like, oh, they asked me for my expertise. They believe in me. They trust me. And then I think the last thing is asking for feedback. I try to do this pretty early and often. Like, hey, if you have any feedback, positive or negative, please let me know. I would rather know now than we go 3 months down the line and the same thing is happening and we haven't done anything about it. And between those three things, I think it can really help for people who are wondering, like, oh, am I this person that they're talking about?
Yeah. I think as well, like we can sometimes conflate ego with stress. So, especially for us working with early stage founders, a lot of the time they are under immense pressure and there's something called bad day behaviors basically that will start to creep out. And maybe they're not even that kind of person. It's just when under duress, that's what starts to creep out. So I think as well, if you're wondering how you are to work with, think about what your bad day behaviors are like. For Rissy, I
Yeah,
assume you get even more controlling probably if things are not going
probably, yeah.
well.
I think
Yeah,
so.
I'm the same. I get even more domineering and controlling, and my
Mhm.
empathy goes down to zero. So, like, things like that, I think is a good way to kind of, without it being like, oh, I have an ego and now I have to like fix it,
Mm.
just think about what
Yeah,
crops up in those situations.
yeah. And that's a great point. And I'll also add to that with the bad day behaviors. One piece of feedback I've given to one of my clients before is this person was the founder of the company. And when they were stressed out or in a bad mood, they could be, let's say, quite rude. And I said to this person, I was like, hey, I've seen this behavior a couple of times, and I know this is not the person that you are, but I also want you to consider, let's just get out of, the impact of your behavior and how it made me feel. If you're treating people across your company like this, as the person at the top of your company, that behavior will trickle down. So now it's not just you treating your leadership team like this, it's your leadership team treating the rest of their employees like this. And you're a growing company. So these one-off instances of you behaving this way can actually shift the culture at your entire company. And I'm sure that's not what you want this company to be. You want it to be a good place to work. You want people to not be stressed out, even if you are. And so just consider, even if you can't get through to changing your behavior just because you know that it's not the right thing to do, think about the impact that it might have on your baby, which is your business.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sage advice.
feel like
Thanks. Yeah.
I feel like Rissy and we worked at the same company at some point, right? Like the same kind of values were instilled slash not
Yeah.
instilled. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. But you also do have to learn this, right? Because if you work in
Mm,
a business and there is a few bad apples, I think it makes you feel like this is it. This is how this is always going to be, right? And that there's no way of tackling that sort of behavior, but there is. I mean, I'd be interested in your guys' take. Well, actually, we're going to get to that later, so I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to go to somewhere else in the questions because I was like, oh no, we're gonna finish with that, and that's a good one. So, how do you guys think that ego kind of plays a part in B2B marketing? Both from a marketer's point of view, like there is value. Like we say, we're
Mhm.
not sitting here saying having an ego is a bad thing, but how does it play a part in kind of like being a good marketer and then
Yeah.
also like from a senior leadership point of view, what does it mean?
Yeah. So with ego and B2B marketing, it flips over to the good side of ego, and I like to make it a tool. So specifically in B2B, in B2C, when you think about somebody, let's say, shops for a car, the only person who's going to maybe pat them on the back for making a good choice is themselves, maybe their family. Like, who benefits from that, right? It's a smaller group of people. However, in B2B, it is literally people's jobs to purchase your product. They are on the clock and spending hours of time in research and speaking to their team and looking through your website to figure out if you're the right choice for them. And so if they make a good choice and you are that choice, that means you've gotten them kudos from their team. You might help them get a promotion. You might help them get recognition at, say, a company event for making such a good choice. And so what I like to do is lean into that. So I have a framework that I use, a value proposition framework, which starts out with the fundamental value message, but then it goes into three strategic differentiators. And those strategic differentiators are framed specifically around how your product helps that person do an even better job at what they're doing. So you say, wow, you're doing such a fantastic job. I'm so proud of you. And also, here's how I'm going to help you do this better. Because you're not only giving that person a way that they can help, they can, get a promotion or do even better at work. You're also giving them the language that shows how the business benefits from your product. And when you frame things that way, you're kind of like operating on their ego and going like, hey, I'm handing you over this thing you can use to make yourself look really good right now. You just have to put it in front of the right people. And so particularly at the base of product marketing, I really enjoy creating messaging to that effect in order to make sales successful.
It's so right though. Like when Ruta and I worked in-house together, we had a customer advocacy program. We used to get a really high word of mouth referral rate. And that
Nice,
is
yeah.
all driven by people's ego, by their fear of missing out, by the fact that, if you are part of this advocacy program, there's notoriety, all of those sorts of things. And that is all driven by ego. And but those things are good behaviors to be showing, to be able to show that you participate in something at a high level, and then to be able to take that back into your business and say, hey, look what we did. We're making us look great.
In terms of like product-led growth, if you've got, it could be that you have secondary users, so it's the person that bought the thing, but then other people have to use it. If you can find ways for them to feel good about using the product, then it's a win-win-win, right? Like, because you've then got a whole population of people that aren't even purchasing your product that know about it, like using it, and hopefully might take it to their next company or suggest it at the next place you're at. So yeah, agreed. It's a really powerful tool. We call it aspirational. Who are you going to be when you use this thing?
Exactly. And then there's also the flip side of it, which is challenging your own ego with that approach, which means I think a lot of people can get stuck in what they think is great about their product, but they're not necessarily thinking of it from the point of view of the customer. And so if you use this approach of how do I help my customer do an even better job, you'll naturally pull yourself out of that thinking that's like me, and this is what I think is great. And so it kind of it benefits on one side of the ego of the person you're selling to, and then also challenging your own.
Yeah, it's a really nice way of looking at it, actually, because that is one of the big things, especially that I'm sure all marketers face, which is how do I get my founder thinking like my ICP? And that's exactly it, isn't it? It's like, it doesn't really matter what we think, even if we do love our product, even if we created it.
I once had a really long and painful campaign planning session because of that. So we knew what the audience was. We knew it was for an event. So it was like a campaign surrounding an event. But when we got to like, well, what's in it for them? Like, what does the person purchasing this thing get? The benefits were like very wishy-washy and very like ethereal. And I was like, guys, this is good enough, like this isn't. But the founder was like, no, like they all need to do this, they all want to do this. I'm like, no, they don't. Like we just discussed previously, like in a few points ahead of like they're super new to this thing. But anyway, it was a extremely painful planning session because the rest of the marketing were like, yeah, we know.
Yeah.
But it's a really great way to also double check the campaigns you are doing and whether that point is strong enough to actually like take advantage of whatever the benefit you think you are providing. God, that was a lot of words.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to your point as well, when you're already in it, it's really hard to shift culture, right? And so I think giving people those very, let's say, simple questions, or let's say simply stated questions of how does this help our customer do a better job? Maybe you're at the bottom of the mountain of trying to shift that culture, but it gives you a starting point, a very tangible. And nobody's going to hear that question and be like, we don't need to worry about that. They're going to be like, it's really important. Exactly.
I think it's also a way to like take people along with the process, because a lot of the time you can just pop out a marketing campaign and then the CEO sees and they're like, whoa, what is all this? As if you hadn't thought through it and painstakingly created this thing that's going to make sense. So when you bring them along and then you do have those hard questions, they were there to answer and to input, which I think is a good way of also getting around ego sometimes, is kind of showing them, as I like to say, like death by spreadsheet. So showing them like the lines and how they calculate one after the other. And when you get to the bottom and you don't like the answer, but you've agreed to every line above, then something needs to change.
Exactly.
So on to the most difficult part of this conversation. What advice would you give to marketers who are listening, who have a boss or a client who are on the negative side of egotistical?
Yeah. So this might be controversial, but I became a consultant because it makes me feel more free. So I have had experiences before where, say, I was dealing with a bad apple within a company and I couldn't get away from that person. So I was stuck either dealing with them or I would have to find a whole new job. And it's a really difficult place to be in, especially given the current job market. Anyone who is not currently job searching, talk to people who are, because the job market is very, very tough right now. And it's tough for people who are full time and it's tough for consultants for many reasons. And so I'm generally not a fan of staying in a negative work environment. I have burnt out before from being in a chaotic work environment where I had to deal with people who weren't necessarily, let's say, didn't have the smallest egos in the world. And so one thing that I like to start with is first asking for feedback. I'm a very lead by example type of person. So if I want somebody to start exhibiting a type of behavior, I will exhibit that behavior myself rather than asking them to exhibit it. And that works really well for people with bigger egos because you're not challenging them. You're kind of just planting an idea in their head without them necessarily realizing it. So one thing you can do is ask for feedback. That can obviously be painful if you're doing it with somebody who has a bigger ego and isn't very empathetic, but it's a good way to start just showing them, how you want to be treated and how the type of environment that you would like to be in. Another one is I really like finding champions throughout the rest of the company. So say I am a part of a team and I'm struggling with a particular person or I can't move a certain project forward. Well, I'm really good at networking through companies and getting to know a lot of different people throughout the company. And you will find people who will advocate for you as well. And so you don't only have to rely on your team. There's a lot of benefit to knowing people in legal, in marketing, in sales, like, even facilities, like all of the different teams across a company. One, because you'll understand how the company works better. You'll understand who has power and you'll make friends who will go to bat for you if you are ever up against the wall. And you also have opportunities potentially to move to other teams in the company if you're determined to stay there and you just don't want to have to deal with a full-blown job search, which for a lot of reasons is difficult for people right now. Another one is speaking to people on your team. So I've had an instance where I was having an issue. I got along really well with my team. A lot of other people were facing that issue. And so I actually had everybody go to our lead and give them that feedback within like a 2-week period, which was I had been getting this feedback for, say, months. I chose like the specific period of time and I was like, hey, what you mentioned to me? Like, can you just go tell this person that, please? Like, I think it would just be really helpful for them to hear. And that was how I was actually able to get some movement on the issue, which was really wonderful. And so, yeah, use the people around you, figure out who your champions are, figure out who your highly empathetic, low ego people are around you. And yeah, I don't want to say use them, but like, team up.
Unionize
Let's say team up.
feedback.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's with everybody, it's a learning opportunity, right? So even if you've got someone who has got an ego and they're not don't feel like they're particularly willing to learn, it's still an opportunity, even just for some self-reflection, right? So it's worth doing. I think one of the things that we have said a lot as well is that if like you're really struggling in your organization and like because of the job market you're not able to leave, so you're like, I'm just gonna ride this wave and there's only so much I can do. I mean, do seek external support. Like, if you want a mentor, like go and find people who are talking about the same things that you are talking about and ask them if they'll mentor you, so that you get that sanity check. Because I think that's the thing, is that when you are dealing with some of these people, like I've dealt with one, like a real bad one, and she made me feel like I was losing my mind.
That's the worst. Oh my
It was
goodness.
really bad. And
Yeah.
but I was very lucky enough to have like I got some career coaching through like a free organization in the UK. And then I had like a group of other people who were like, oh, have you thought about the fact that you could actually just go, I was doing like a hybrid role at the time, so you could just go straight into marketing and exit the business that way. But that support was the thing that helped me get the like shift. So I was like, I can't deal with this person. I've got to the point where I've done all the management of this person that I can do, but I have this like external support that kind of makes me feel like I'm not crazy, which was very helpful.
Can I give some petty advice? Yeah, my petty advice is keep receipts.
Yes.
And keep the
Yes.
receipts.
Love it.
And be good at confirming and double checking things.
Yes.
Because I feel like when people have big egos, one thing that they don't like to be told is that they have basically changed their mind or they have forgotten the thing that they signed up for. So keep receipts and make sure you like double check and double confirm things, because when they change their mind 2 weeks later and they want you to, I don't know, make them a podcast, you can be like, oh, but you don't want to do this other thing that you signed up for and we spent all this time doing. So that's my petty advice.
No, I don't think it's petty advice at all. I think it's super helpful. It's like, again, how do you stay sane? It's like, well, if somebody said something to you over email or Slack or whatever, or you, even if you have a meeting, take notes, circulate the notes. It's boring, but it's worth doing.
I have this actually to both of your points. I have two very tactical things for this. One is that for every client, I keep like, I'll just say client name journal. And every meeting that I'm in, the notes go in there. I have ADHD, so my brain unfortunately does not turn off, which means that sometimes at 3 a.m. I have, a great idea or something that I need to get out of my head. And it all goes into that document. So I actually had this happen with a client last week, and this person is a wonderful person. So this is no shade at all, but they had asked me to do something and then forgotten that they asked me for it. And so when I went to follow up and get more detail, they were like, oh, whose idea was that? Can you get more detail? And I was like, wait,
was you?
yeah. And they apologized. Like, this is not, like I said, this is no shade.
Yeah.
But I was able to go back to my notes and say, it was actually your idea. Here are the things that you said to me, and that like quickly jogged their memory. So even not from a petty perspective, especially as a consultant, but I think it works for people who are in-house too. Just have like a full journal of everything that you've talked about and write down the things that are important to you. The other one for tactical, in terms of building these relationships throughout your company, I think that people find networking really difficult or they don't know how to go about it. One thing that I would do is read company updates when they would come out. And if anybody was working on a project that I think was interesting or something interesting was said about them, I would literally send them an email with the subject line "time to chat." And I would say, hey, I saw that you were mentioned in this, or I saw that you're working on this thing. Do you have 30 minutes to just like meet and talk to me about it? Because I think it's really interesting. People love to talk about themselves. Use that. It's so helpful. And it makes the path to kind of like building these allies throughout your company a lot easier, because you're not like, oh, I'm going to like ask for their time just so that I can use them later. It's not about that. It's about building relationships. And when you have a starting point, like, oh, this person did something interesting, or I want to learn more about this, it's a really easy way to get in with them.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice.
Great advice, because I think people do always worry, don't they, about reaching out and being like, oh, I don't want to waste your time.
What we're going to talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it doesn't need to be that awkward.
Yeah. And when you do it, even if you've asked for someone's time, always ask if you can help them at the end. You'd be surprised what responses you get.
Especially if you're in marketing. You'd better believe they can think of something. You better believe they can think of something. Okay, well, so to round... Oh, actually, I want to ask you guys a question about ego. Mm-hmm. Personally, do you guys think you have an ego?
I mean, everyone does, right?
I know, but like what... Like,
are we going to like rate it, or like...
Yeah.
Or how much does it get in your way?
Do you want to know what ticks me off?
Go on then. Yeah. How much do you think your ego gets in your way? I like that question.
Yeah, I try not to let it get in my way. I like being a curious person. I try to be aggressively curious at any point I can. I can't stand mean people. That is the one thing that will send me off. Especially if I'm actually nicer if they're being mean to me, but watching somebody be mean to somebody else, I'm like, oh no, we're not doing this. That's actually why I ended up with the person I used to work with sending all this feedback in this 2 week period, because I had already been dealing with like having a hard time with this one person, but having everybody else come to me about them, I was like, see, now we're
Oh,
not
no,
doing
girl.
Too
this.
late.
Now I'm
No,
pissed.
Yeah.
Oh,
Emma
yeah,
and I were in the car yesterday. We literally had this conversation because neither of us like conflict, but I'm like, if someone's beefing with someone that I like, I will be
yes,
there. Like,
exactly.
I'm ready to throw down. Anyway, in a company situation, obviously not physically, right?
Yeah, no, emotionally.
sure.
Emotionally throw down, yeah. I will
Yeah.
ruin your life. I'm very protective. Is that ego? I don't know. Maybe. No. I think that's a separate
There's
thing.
something in you that I think there's something in you that believes in protection. And so when that's triggered, that part is ego. But yeah, no, the protective nature, I wouldn't say is necessary.
Yeah, because I think in order for you to, the social injustice thing, or just injustice in general, definitely like sounds like it's a problem for all three of us. I think that is driven a little bit by ego, because even though you might not think like this, the fact that you think you should be the person that steps in,
Absolutely.
there has to be
True.
a reason why we think
Yeah.
it's appropriate for us to step in.
Mhm.
So there's definitely something in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I'm like, I shouldn't step into this. I want to, but I'm not going to because this isn't
Yeah.
my place.
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
Do you think yours gets in the way, Ruta?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a specific type of person when they tell me what to do, I can't, even if it's good advice, I can't. Like the authority complex comes through. And if it's like, I feel like if it's from people that have lived a very privileged life, and like maybe if let's say in marketing, if they haven't had their finger in the game for a long time and then they're telling me how to do marketing, I'm like, no, this is not going to work out for us. So I think it does get in the way then, because I can actually become quite defensive as well, which is not a good situation
Right.
for anyone to deal with. So I think that's the one that I can think of that comes to my mind, especially in terms of work.
I agree with that actually. You reminded me of a moment where I had a coach give me advice about something that I completely didn't agree with. So obviously I am a Black woman and I was being coached by somebody who isn't. They told me they were coaching me on public speaking actually. And they told me that I needed to enunciate and be louder. And I was like, I feel like this advice is not taking my identity into account. You probably give this advice to all of your clients, and cool, I see how that would be important. But personally, I have a fairly like low voice. I speak very calmly. I'm not a yeller. I don't even like yelling. I don't like raising my voice, and it works for me. And I think I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah. Sometimes you just wonder, don't you?
Yeah, it's the same thing of like blanket advice, when like someone's really not taking like the nuance into consideration. I'm like, well, that was not useful, was it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Emma, are you happy with those answers?
Very happy.
Did you go for yours? Social injustice, basically?
Well, yeah.
Or do you have like a more specific marketing maybe example?
I think mine is very similar to yours, which is that just, if there's someone who's not been in the game long enough, or someone who's not worked with the type of businesses we've worked with before, but then they're the one trying to tell me what to do, I find that very difficult. But I have very big Slytherin energy, as everyone who knows me properly will know. And so while I'm definitely plotting their demise in the background, so it's kind of fine. I don't know if that's ego or if that's just evil, I'm not sure, but that is what happens. So
Slytherin.
it's the Slytherin energy. There's no other way to describe it.
I love it.
So, as with every episode, we would love to round up with some marketing gossip. Is there anything that you've recently seen that you love or that you hate or that you just can't stop thinking about when it comes to marketing?
So I feel like this is such a nerdy answer, but I'm really curious about how LinkedIn works for businesses right now, because I saw this data point, I want to say about 3 months ago, and it said that if somebody like a purchaser follows a company on LinkedIn already, they're super likely to choose that business when they're ready to find something within that solution, even if they go through a whole research process. So there's like 2 points. One is following the business on LinkedIn, but the other one is being aware of the business when they go into that buying process. And so I'm trying to figure out how businesses, especially ones that don't have super like sexy products, build a persona on LinkedIn that really draws people in so that they are able to enable their sales team when things move in that direction in the future. My current biggest client is not a very sexy product at all. They're literally a training tool and provide certifications within finance. And so I'm just a few weeks into this right now. And the biggest thing top of mind for me is how do I create a personality for them on that platform that still feels like it's just as serious as the business is, because it really is a very serious business, but in a way is, entertaining or draws people in enough that they're like, yeah, this is who I want to be engaging with. This is what I want to talk about. This is, what I'll bring up when people ask me, who I think is doing a good job.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, obviously, I don't know exactly what this business is, but I think the one word that comes to me is like generosity. So making what you share generous, aka useful, and things that maybe other people, other businesses of that sort wouldn't share, because it's still serious, right? But it's, yeah. But again, I could be the person giving blanket advice right now, and Rissy's getting triggered, so I'm going to stop.
No, not at all.
It's like, shut up.
That's actually a good point. You have good instincts.
Gossip, we love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rissy. It was lovely to have you on. And if you are either worried about your own ego or worried about someone else's ego, you can always drop us a line. You know where to find us. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.